I was recently listening to my favorite podcast, This American Life. Some of you might enjoy it as well. I'm an avid listener. And this week, Ira talked about how the theme was going to be regrets. Ira Glass, the host, that everybody has regrets, right? And if you don't, then you probably haven't taken any risks. You probably haven't taken some big leap of faith. You haven't jumped so high that you fell flat on your face. But see, I disagree with Ira, and I don't do that a lot, you should know. But I disagree with him about this because I think I've led a pretty risky life. I think I've taken some big leaps, and I'll tell you, some of them I fell flat on my face. But I don't really regret any of them. And part of that is because I think that every time something happens, right, I try to think about not what I should or could have done differently to avoid the situation, but rather what can I learn from it, right? So I've taken some huge risks. When I was about your age, some of you are in high school thinking about going off to college, I decided to go to college not just in a city, but an entire state that I had never been to till I arrived at my freshman dorm. After I graduated college, I moved to New York City with $250 in the bank. And even after 5 years of working there and having moderate success, I decided to bail on it all and move back to Pittsburgh because I fell in love and I was going to get married, right? These were all moments, each of them, where I thought, this is it. This is the moment that I might regret for the rest of my life. But part of that, I think, is, I don't know about you, those of you who are in high school right now, but when I really thought life looked like that, right? So at the time, I remember people asking me, so what is it you want to do? What do you want to be? Where are you going to go to college? What are you going to major in, right? And it felt like all the answers to those questions were the B, right? Everybody was asking about that. My parents' friends, my dentist, they all want to know, what's B, right? And at the time, it felt like it's a real straight path, right? But I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that in real life, it kind of looks more like that, right? And I have to tell you, for me and a bunch of other people, it actually kind of looks more like this. But that's okay. So, the folks who asked me to come today, they asked me to talk about education. And maybe they did that because I've served on the Pittsburgh Public School Board. Or maybe they did that because as the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation, I'm one of the lead educators in our program called GirlGov, where we train 100 teenage girls to be radical activists every year. State legislators. And that might be why they invited me. But I really think that for most of us, what we come to learn, and a lot of the speakers today have referred to this, is that our greatest education has really been life. So I tried to map out for you a really easy diagram of my A to B, right? So here's some real simple facts about me. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. I went to Washington, D.C. during my 11th grade year to become a congressional page because I was very interested in politics and very interested in leaving my house. Then I went to Carnegie Mellon. At Carnegie Mellon, I studied literary and cultural studies and theater. I was going to become a feminist director. I moved to New York. I worked there for about 5 years. Lots of jobs making little money in the theater, and lots of jobs working in marketing and business development in the dot-com world, making a lot more money. And then I moved back to Pittsburgh, and I became the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation. That seems pretty straightforward, right? Not too bad. The thing is, I think it kind of really, if I was honest, looks more like this. So, yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. And you can see how one thing clearly led to the next thing. So this is probably my life up till now. And what I hope that you're going to see through your life too is that it's not actually those real simple moments that we actually end up learning the most from. It's all this other stuff. And it's not just that these are distractions. they're actually the things that teach us. They're actually the things that bring us to the next place. So instead of that real simple A to B, I like to think of it more like this, right? And the reason is because maybe, just maybe, you have to go from A to F to C to get to B, right? And you might need to go ADB, and you might do AB. And that's okay, no judgment, you know? If you go A to B, that's good. But why I like this one better than the whole squiggly diagram is that in the squiggly diagram, I feel like what it's saying is everything between A and B is kind of a distraction. You're getting lost. You're getting lost in the forest, and you don't know where you're going, and eventually, accidentally, you end up back at B. But if we think about our lives like this, right, it might just be that if we didn't get to F, we would never get to B. And it might just be that our destination changes along the way based on what we're learning. So, a number of the speakers today have used this phrase, experiential learning, and that's a bit of what I'm talking about, and I'm not the first person to come up with it, right? And it's this idea that you learn while doing, right? So a good application of this is when my son was in preschool, at one point the teachers had them build a robot, and they were gonna do that using Dixie cups and popsicle sticks, and while they were doing that, right, while they were going to build their robot, they would accidentally learn math, right? And a little bit of architecture, and a little bit of design, and a little bit of engineering. They're gonna learn by doing, right? So here are the famous thinkers that have come up with that idea. But what I'm talking about is also something that my mom used to irritatingly say quite often as I was growing up, and this is the mom theory. And about every time something happened that didn't end up quite right, my mom would often say, well, you know what, Heather, it's the journey, not the destination, right? A number of people I'm sure you've heard that, right? So this is experiential learning, and maybe you've seen this graph before, but in a formalized idea, what it's saying is you experience something, and then you start to talk about it, and you start to process it, and you're gonna start to integrate that information, and then you're gonna apply it someplace else, right? And it's easy to think about how that happens in a classroom, right? But what does that look like when it's this, right? So I want to give you a few examples of where all these random things come together. So one little example is that when I went to college, I went to Carnegie Mellon. And there are other theater schools in this country and other liberal arts schools in this country where you could go and not learn computer engineering, you could not learn computer code, you could just focus on acting. But at Carnegie Mellon, every single one of us had to take web design. Every single one of us needed to learn computer language, even though we knew we would never, ever, ever use that information, ever, for the rest of our lives. Okay, so here's the thing. I get to New York, and I go to this temp agency. And I think, like all my other friends that are in New York and that are in theater, that I'm probably going to end up waiting tables, which I've done a lot, right? And so I fill out the form, and she says, what have you done? And I say, well, I've waited tables a lot, and I expect that's probably what I'm going to do here in New York. And she says, well, it says here on your form that you know HTML code? I said, oh, yeah. She said, really? I said, yeah. She said, oh, okay, I have a job for you. And that was the beginning of how I accidentally found myself in the world of .com New York City in the 90s, being a professional consultant on website development because I had learned it at Carnegie Mellon, right? It wasn't the thing I went to Carnegie Mellon to learn, but it was the thing that put food on my table and provided me rent in New York City while I pursued my dreams of the theater. So I want to give you just two more examples, and the first one is Wonder Woman. So how is it that one of the greatest superheroes ever taught me everything that I needed to know about being a feminist philanthropist? So when I was 4, someone gave me a book. It was a friend of my mom's, and this was the first book that I can remember owning and reading and loving and feeling like was mine. And I brought that book everywhere. It was a collection of the Golden Age comics of Wonder Woman, full color, right? And it was fantastic. She would save people. She was strong. She was fighting for truth and justice. She was amazing. And my 4-year-old self just loved it, and I read it cover to cover constantly. I carried it everywhere I went, and in fact, it even went to college with me, to Carnegie Mellon. Now, when I first showed up at Carnegie Mellon as a freshman director, we were asked to write our mission statements. And so my mission statement, I recently found. My husband and I had moved houses a couple of years ago, and when we were going through the move, I found a box that I hadn't even opened since the last move. So this particular box had moved with me from Pittsburgh to New York City, to 3 different apartments in New York City, and then back to Pittsburgh, and I had never opened it. So it clearly had some really important things that were very useful, I needed desperately. They were so important, they had to move with me, for 4 different households. So I thought, well, I should open up this box and see what the heck's in it, right? So I opened up the box, and I found my mission statement as a freshman director. And what it said was that, as a director, my mission was going to be to amplify women's voices and use the theater to engage communities in social change. Okay. So, also at Carnegie Mellon, my college roommate one day asked me if she could look at my Wonder Woman book. She said, "Can I look at your Wonder Woman book?" And I said, "Of course, yeah, sure." So she's looking at it, and a few minutes later she says, "Oh, well, it all makes sense now." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, the introduction is by Gloria Steinem, and it was published by Ms. Magazine." I said, "No way." So I ran over and looked at it. I had never even noticed that before, right? Read it tons as a kid, closed it up. It was so special. It came everywhere with me. I hadn't even realized that as a 4-year-old, I had read over and over and over and over again the words of Gloria Steinem, talking about this incredible way that this Amazon warrior was empowering other women, empowering them to see that they could achieve truth and justice and peace if they could just reflect on the strength that they had within themselves. So my roommate says, "Well, now it all makes sense. That's why you're a feminist, this book." So after I graduated Carnegie Mellon and I went and did some theater work, I still was doing lots of feminist work. I came back to Pittsburgh, and I have to tell you, I was terrified. I was terrified. How was I going to be able to have any meaning, have any impact on a national feminist movement if I came back to Pittsburgh and left New York? How is anyone going to know what I was doing? How was I going to engage in any kind of interesting or relevant work? And I came back. And then I was really fortunate, because on that big, messy diagram of my life, one of the things was one of the plays that I ended up writing and directing here in Pittsburgh after I came back from New York was called Yo Mama. And it was about new moms in a yoga class. And it was, pretty feminist. It was also really popular. And so what happened was a group of women came up to me and said, "You should apply. You should apply for this new Women and Girls Foundation. They're looking for a CEO. You should apply for that." And I said, "What do I know about running a nonprofit?" Right? I've never done that. And they said, "Well, but didn't you work in marketing and raising money for .coms in New York?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I raised $15 million in venture capital, but what's that have to do with nonprofits?" Right? And then I said, "Well, what's this organization about? What's its mission?" And they said, "Oh, it's to promote equality for women and girls." I thought, all right, maybe I'll apply. So I did. And it has been one of the most incredible adventures of my life. And at Women and Girls Foundation, we've done some really bold, exciting things. We had a girl cut against Abercrombie & Fitch that landed us on the Today Show, and CNN, and at MSNBC, and the corporate boardroom of Abercrombie & Fitch. We passed legislation to increase equity for women and people of color here at the city and the county and the state level. Recently, we worked with a big coalition to bring about paid sick leave, right? And each time that we've done this great work, one of the most interesting things that's happened is that we've connected with our sisters and brothers doing this kind of work nationally. And a few years ago, a colleague came up to me and she said, Heather, would you be interested in serving on the board of directors of the Ms. Foundation? The Ms. Foundation, the publishers of that Wonder Woman book. So of course I said yes, and there's a picture of me and Gloria Steinem last spring when I was inducted as the youngest board chair of the Ms. Foundation. Now, I don't think any of it would have happened, without the thing before. And one of the most incredible things to me is that I never would have become the board chair of one of the most historic national feminist organizations based in New York City if I had not left New York City, right? Because it's the work I've done here in Pittsburgh that brought that all together. Okay, one last example, super fast. And this one's more specific around learning. Okay, so you've heard me talk a lot about feminism. You've heard me talk a lot about theater, right? These were two passions in my life. Television was just something I did to earn a buck. So, first job I ever had, I was hired to do a television show. I was in first grade, and it was going to be filmed at the Metro Zoo in Miami. It was called Who's Who at the Zoo. Maybe you've heard of it. Probably not. Anyway, one of the best things for me as a first grader was that I got to miss like a month of school. But I learned, I was in the show, I learned how the cameras worked, I got to be in a studio booth and do voiceover work. It all seemed really, really cool. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life, because in my drama classes, that's where I thrived. At the community theater, that's what I loved. This television gig, it was interesting, it was fine, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So then I went to Carnegie Mellon, right? And I majoring in theater, right? Great theater school. I go to the work study office to find out what work do they have available for a work study kid. And I find out that there's this internship at Mr. Rogers' neighborhood at WQED. So I sign up, and I end up working at Mr. Rogers' neighborhood for 5 years and become the assistant associate producer over at Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, which was still filming at WQED, right? That's all fine and good. That was all interesting. It helped me pay my rent, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. What I wanted to do with my life was feminist theater, right? So then I went to New York, worked lots of theater gigs, got to direct some incredible plays. Most of that didn't pay me any money. So the thing I did on the side, the thing that paid the bills, was I directed television commercials, right? And when I came back to Pittsburgh, I was very honored to be invited to serve on the board of WQED, where I had been an intern so many years earlier. Recently, at the Women and Girls Foundation, a few years ago, I was given the opportunity to direct a documentary about women presidents, something that was very important to me. It became a sabbatical project. It was something that I dedicated many years of my life to building with the team at the Women and Girls Foundation. And we finished the documentary and still touring the country right now. And when I first was on the sort of festival circuit, I remember someone asking me, were you nervous about directing your first documentary? And I realized that I wasn't, because for me, I had thought about it as television. So see, our documentary, Madam Presidenta, it was debuting on WQED, on PBS. It was an hour documentary. It was built for an hour of television. I knew how to build television, right? I learned that as a kid. I learned that in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I learned that on all those commercial shoots. Remember all those things I was doing that weren't really what I was doing? All of those experiences. If I hadn't had any of them, I wouldn't have been able to direct Madam Presidenta, one of the things I'm most proud of in life. So, life, it's an education, right? And I think my mom's right, that it is the journey, not the destination. But I want to take it one step further and argue that it's actually the journey that helps you figure out what the destination is in the first place. And it's on the journey that you're going to learn what you need to find your destination. And so when you're living it, I think it kind of feels like this, right? Whole bunch of mishmash stuff. Doesn't seem connected, and it's all sometimes very overwhelming. But in the end, it kind of ends up looking like this. So this was a photo collage that I made of the last 3 years of my life on Facebook, right? And I think that if you take anything from today, and you've heard it from every single speaker, something that they learned when they tried something and they fell flat on their face, that ended up being the seed for their greatest success. Someone they met along the way who gave them a job, that person ended up being one of their most important mentors. So thank you for listening to me and all the other speakers today, and I hope that this was just one day on your journey. Thank you.